hand. I'd ask Commissioner Veronica Buchanan to lead us in prayer and our pledge. Would Gail call the roll?
Rhonda Allen. Here. Richie Boland. Veronica Buchanan. Here. Will Jordan. Here. Mike Cush. Present. Craig Lynch. Pettis Reed. Steve Sandlin. Here. Mike Vaught. Vincent Windrow. Jeff Phillips.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. I believe you have a copy of the Codes Department report in front of you, and if you have any questions, we'll try to get David to answer those. None, we'll move along. Any items deferred or withdrawn?
No, sir.
Item number 6A, waiver request. Mary Parsons is requesting an off-site soil waiver for property located along Stewart's Creek Road.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you, and good evening, Chairman and members of the Commission. The comments for this waiver request were on your table for you, and they look like this, so we'll be following along with that. This property is located on the west side of Stewart Creek Road, which is to the north of Burnt Knob Road. It's adjacent to both the Smotherman Park and Stewart Springs subdivisions, although it's not part of either of those. It's approximately 6 acres in size. There's an existing house on the property. The applicant would like to subdivide 0.8 acres from the parent tract to possibly build a second house in the future. There is a larger copy of the plat on your tables as well for your review. The one in the agenda can be a little small. So the existing house would remain on the 5.2 acres. The plan does identify soils areas for both lots. However, they can only fit a primary area on lot 1. They're depending on the duplicate area on the remaining acreage, which is the 5.2 acres, but they would have to get to that through a off-site soils easement. So that's against county subdivision regulations, which is why they're asking for the waiver to that provision. Besides that, the plat appears to be in good order. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Questions?
Doug, it's on the back corner of the piece of property right there is the soil site we're talking about, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, for the tight line, how wide is that?
You're talking the area between the L2 and the L8? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, yes.
Looks like about, there's not a measurement here for it, but I would guess it just looking at it, probably about somewhere around 10, 15 feet, roughly, looking at it.
Okay, David, would that be wide enough? Any problems to go in there with a backhoe, dig it up? That certainly need to be wide enough for any kind of piece of machinery to go through there.
I think that would be sufficient.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to approve the request.
Second. Have a second. Questions or discussion?
I have a question.
Alan.
Do we have any idea what the soil situation, the soil site situation looks like on the portion that they're wanting to section off, that 0.8 acres?
When you say the soil situation, Ms. Allen, what exactly are you referring to?
What we're talking about here is the primary and secondary, and the secondary is off-site.
Right.
And so is the secondary going to be on the 0.8 that's being sectioned off?
Yeah, the primary would be actually on the lot, the soil area on lot 1.
Right, but the secondary-
The secondary would be off the site, right?
So is
further
it
in
on the
back.
section that we're sectioning off, or is it on a different?
It's on a different one. It's on the remaining, the way the plat's drawn, the way he's got that almost looks like it's a separate lot, but it's not. That's just identifying where the easement is. But, yeah, the secondary site would be on the remaining 5.2 acres, and then they've got the existing house with its backup on that existing 5.2 acres as well. Am I answering your question?
Well,
feel like I am.
yeah, the way it's drawn, it just looked like the secondary lot was this small sliver to the,
Right, that's identifying the easement for lot 1 for that secondary site. That's what that's not actually that's not a separate lot that they're
Okay.
creating. Right.
okay, that's what I'm trying to make.
Right, I'm sorry, yeah, the way it's drawn in, it kind of looks like that, but that's not what he's proposing there. That's just identifying the area of the easement.
Other questions? Motion is to approve. All those in favor, please say aye. Any opposition? Motion carries. Item 7A, submitted for final plat approval, Colonial Estates, Section 12, Phase 1E, 2 lots zoned R15, located along Dreama Court, BC Developers.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Planning commissioners are probably familiar with this subdivision. This is the 5th phase of Section 12 that we've seen for Colonial Estates along Dreama Court. Basically what he's doing is, in lieu of, he'll be coming back later this month with the rest of this section, but you'll see that the 2 lots that he's proposing, he actually has buyers for now, is wanting to try to get started on them as soon as possible. So what he's done is he's essentially created a new phase for just lots 333 and 334. Dreama Court is existing. It goes all the way back to where it accesses the step system for the development. There was a similar plat where he did another 2 lot like this last year. As far as the plat itself, it's in pretty good order. He'll have to bond the amount for the roads and the drainage that's left on the lot, as we would with any final plat. But besides that, the plat appears to be in good order. And if Mr. Corbett has any other comments on that, I can certainly defer to him. But as far as I know, we're in pretty good shape with this.
The main comment would be the reason that you're seeing, because there's 2 lots, is the fact that the front part of the road is not completed, and we needed to bond that road. We can't approve the lots if it's not on a county road, so we have to bond it so it would carry through. Otherwise, we could have handled this in the office. It just mainly has to do with the fact of the road and make sure it's bonded to make sure it's completed.
Like you said, he's coming back in for another section to finish this other section. This is just coming, maybe a pre-sale or something already.
Something to that effect, yes, sir. The next phase we'll be looking at the next planning commission meeting actually has 9 lots on it, and will be some more of the lots around it.
It'll tie in, thank you.
You okay with,
Yes,
You
sir.
okay
It
with
appears to
that?
be in good order.
make a motion to approve it?
Motion to approve and a second. Any other questions, discussions? Will?
That is subject to Dale's comments about the road bond and all, I take it.
And we won't sign it for recording until we have all that anyway, so, yes, sir.
Thank you. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Item 8, rezoning requests and public hearings. Item A, Michael Villanova, rezoning and conditional use permit, location 9304 Independent Hill Road, Commissioner Steve Sandlin. Size of site is approximately 21 acres, tax map 76, existing zone R15, proposed zoning, agricultural services, conditional use is requested for dog daycare and boarding facility.
Thank you, Chairman Phillips. The application before you, the applicant is proposing to convert an existing accessory building into a dog daycare and boarding facility, which would be called Dogwood Hollow. This would be a home-based business run by the applicant and his wife. This facility will include 20 private kennels, an indoor play area, and an outside play area. The hours of operation would be Monday through Friday from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. and Saturday and Sunday by appointment. As you can see in the aerial, the facility is going to be situated kind of towards the center of the 21 acres, and the track is heavily vegetated, so there will be pretty good screening between the facility and any neighbors. In fact, the closest neighboring residence is located over 600 feet away. Now, the comprehensive plan does show this property as being located in the general urban character area, and this proposal would fall within the recommended uses for that area. Something else I want to point out, in the new zoning map, a kennel would be classified as an animal care and veterinary services, which is allowed as a special exception in the agricultural residential zone. So if this were to be approved tonight, we would be recommending this property be zoned agricultural on the new map so that there'd be no inappropriate commercial uses also approved for it. So it would just be agricultural to match that use. So here's just a quick little concept plan. They're going to fence it about half an acre and provide some parking. They've done a little artistic drawing of what they propose for it to look like when they're finished. And then just a quick look at the property. This is looking at the property from Independent Hill Road. You can't even see the facility from the road. And then I just took a couple of quick pictures of the building itself. Obviously, they're going to do a lot of work on it before it would be ready, but this is just what it looked like that day. And the applicant is present, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Questions before the public hearing? Veronica?
Commissioner Sandlin, have you gotten any calls, good or bad, on this particular?
The office has also received 0 phone calls on this application.
Any other questions? At this time, we'll have our public hearing, and I'll declare the public hearing open. Anyone wishing to speak for or against, I guess it would be appropriate if the applicant would come forward at this time, if you don't mind. If you would come up here. Good evening.
My name's Michael Villanova, the owner of the property at 9304 Independent Hill Road, and we're any questions about the property or the facility that we're looking to open, I certainly can answer any questions you have.
Just going to ask, are y'all in the business now? Or y'all just wanting to move it out to your house, or?
Presently, I'm conducting a business doing pet sitting and in-home pet sitting and dog walking, and we're looking to open a facility to do that sort of business out of our home, and as opposed to doing the in-home pet sitting.
Thank you, Mr. Villanova. Appreciate that. Anyone else like to speak for or against this zoning proposal? This time I'll declare the public hearing closed, and we're open for discussion.
Mr. Chairman, I don't have any problem in making a motion to approve the zoning of agricultural services for this location for this daycare, dog daycare.
Second. Any other questions or discussions? Mike?
Is he allowed to then have a sign on the street? And if so, obviously he understands that we have to meet certain dimensional requirements.
Yes, as the agricultural services, he would be allowed to have a sign, and he'd have to come pull sign permits and meet all the sign regulations.
Question for just my edification. I'm not sure that it's not in here, but is there outside storage, inside storage?
To my knowledge, there will only be an outside play area. All the actual kennels will be inside the building, as will the office area and anything else.
At night, dogs will be inside.
That's my understanding, yes.
Any other questions? Have a motion to approve and a second. All those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Item 8B, Mike Hollingshead is a rezoning, location 7279 Mona Road. Commissioner is Will Jordan. Size of site is approximately 1 3/4 acres. Tax map 21. Existing zone is services. Proposed zoning is R15.
This site is located on Mona Road, and it is a small portion of a larger 162-acre tract. It's currently a vacant corner of the Cedar Crest Golf Course, and the applicant is proposing to place 2 residential lots containing 1.4 acres on this corner here. So they're looking to go back to residential zoning in order to facilitate that. The comprehensive plan shows it as a suburban character area, and this would be a use permitted by right in that character area. You should have a concept plan in front of you of the 2-lot subdivision they're proposing to do with this corner. And just a quick look at the property. It's currently just the vacant corner here. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
I believe that's on hole number 10, isn't it, Steve? Any questions for the staff? If not, declare the public hearing open. And is Mr. Hollingshead here, please? Okay. As I said, the public hearing is open. Anyone wishing to speak for or against this proposal? Not, I declare the public hearing closed. Comments and questions?
Got a feeling the applicant thought this was so non-controversial. That's probably why he didn't come. I've had no calls whatsoever about this in my district out there, and everybody seemed, what few people I did, ask, see about the thing, said, well, building a couple of houses, okay, So with that, I'll make a motion to approve with contingent staff conversation.
I'll second.
To approve in a second. Other discussion? All those in favor of the motion to approve, please say aye. Any opposition? Motion carries. Item 9 is staff reports and other business. Doug?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. This time, we'd like to just continue discussions on the draft zoning regulations and the zoning map. At our last work session we had in April, we had a lot of good discussion at that meeting. You'll recall that we presented the compromise for the 1 acre per unit area by basically saying if you had the water available, also the sewer infrastructure or step system, and that you could build up to 3 units an acre. If you had septic and adequate water, you could do basically 2 units an acre. If you didn't have adequate water, you're at 1 unit an acre. That appears to, at least from what I've heard at this point, that seems to have been pretty well received by the community. I think there are still some concerns out there. So I don't know if we need to discuss that any further tonight, but one of the items that was also brought up at the meeting regarded the regulations for rock quarries. I believe Mr. Lynch had brought that up for possible further discussion. After the meeting, we kind of put our heads together as staff and tried to figure out how we wanted to address that. Something we did was we subscribed to what's called the Planning Advisory Service through the American Planning Association, the APA. That's a service where if you have issues and questions, you can basically email them a request. They'll do some research for you, send you back some results, and helps us in identifying how other communities in the country may handle similar issues to what we're dealing with. Because typically what we found is we're not necessarily reinventing the wheel. We're just trying to see who else has already dealt with that problem. So what you have before you tonight, we emailed this to you Friday. Hopefully you had a chance to review it. It's a little report about quarry regulations. I'm not going to go into this just real in depth. I'm just going to try to give you just a quick overview. The communities that we looked at varied. There were several around the country. There were 3, I believe, in Tennessee, but Anderson County, Tennessee, and I may not be saying this right, but Batavia, Ohio, Charlotte, North Carolina, Clackamas County, Oregon, Fairfield, Ohio, Guilford County, North Carolina, Knox County, Tennessee, City of Kyle, Texas, Shelby, North Carolina, and then Williamson County, their draft ordinance. And the first thing what we did was give an overview of our current regulations in Rutherford County, what we currently have on the books right now. I think we're pretty all familiar with those. And then we went into basically what we looked at were 3 different areas, 3 to 4 different areas we looked at. We looked at where they're permitted, and what zones, and then the process for approval. We also looked at the setbacks and minimum area required, if any, for quarrying. And then we also looked at required screening. The issue that was brought to us really dealt more with the setbacks of that. So there's a table in here under Appendix A that kind of goes through, gives you a quick overview of all the different regulations for all the different communities and what we found. I'll kind of keep my discussion centered around the setbacks and minimum areas, as well as a little discussion on the permitted zones. But what we found for the setbacks was that 3 of the jurisdictions, this is coming right out of the report, 3 of the jurisdictions staff reviewed after getting the response back from the Planning Advisory Service required a minimum acreage for quarry operations, those being Shelby and Charlotte, North Carolina, and also Williamson County, Tennessee. Their acreage requirements did range from 20 to 100 acres. Minimum acreages requirements were also supplemented by setback distances from adjacent properties. Both Shelby and Charlotte had setbacks for specific quarry activities such as excavation, rock crushing, blasting, those kind of activities. Williamson County proposed quarries to have at least 20 acres in area, a minimum 200-foot setback from all structures, and activities from all property lines, and with the exception of parking, fencing, and office, 1,000 feet from residentially zoned properties. Our current regulations, the I-3 zone, which we don't really have any on the map, and this is under our existing ordinance, does require a 20-acre minimum in the I-3 zone, but does not establish any kind of a minimum acreage for quarry operations in the draft zoning document that we have. We pretty much left that part of it out. But our setback requirements are still, as based on our last discussion, proposed to remain at 1,500 feet from any excavation, quarry wall, storage area, from any public rights-of-way, community assemblies, all residentially zoned properties or residential portions of PUDs, and then also 1 mile from all schools. Now, another issue that kind of, I guess, intrigued us a little bit as we were looking at this dealt with the permitted zones for approval. Most of the jurisdictions that we reviewed did limit rock quarries to industrially zoned districts, but there were several that, like Clackamas County in Oregon, and also Fairfield Township in Ohio, and also Williamson County here in Tennessee, which did allow quarries in agricultural or residential type districts. Now, kind of the evolution of the regulations we had, when we first looked at rock quarries, we were looking at them as special exceptions. We never looked at them permitted by right, as I recall, but we did look at them by special exception in the heavy industrial zone, the light industrial zone, and also the agricultural residential zone. After discussion, it was determined that perhaps we just keep it in the heavy industrial zone, and that was it. Now, under issues for consideration, when we're talking about permitted zones, quarries are generally considered industrial type uses. They're typically located on large parcels in areas that are sparsely developed and not served by public facilities such as water and sewer as much. Of the 4 quarries that are located in Rutherford County, really they're all surrounded by primarily residentially zoned or residentially zoned land, or land that's just used agriculturally but still zoned residential. So looking at this, the concern that we started having as staff as part of this process, I know one of the concerns when we first started talking about the zoning map and everything was, we originally showed the quarries all zoned heavy industrial. One of the concerns that had come out at that time was that, well, by doing this as heavy industrial, you're also opening the door to a lot of other uses in the industrial zone that may be permitted by right, which may not be good fits to the area if the quarry were ever to stop quarrying, essentially, whenever it was pretty much finished and then reclaimed. The concern that I think that we had as staff after looking at this more and more is perhaps it might not be a bad idea to look at the possibility of allowing quarries by special exception in agriculturally zoned areas, and we kind of go through the rationale behind that in the report. Basically what's going to happen is whenever if there is a need for another quarry in Rutherford County, they're going to have to go through the zoning process, regardless if it's zoned heavy industrial or if you want to zone it to agricultural purposes. If the land is rezoned, assuming that it is by the, Planning Commission makes a recommendation and the Board of Commissioners makes the final determination, if it is rezoned, then they still have the extra step of going through the Board of Zoning Appeals for the special exception to that. Now, if you zone a piece of property industrial, it goes to the Board of Zoning Appeals and they deny the special exception, they can't do a rock quarry there, but they can still do all the other uses permitted by right in the industrial area, in the heavy industrial zone. By the same token, they'll still have to go through the zoning process for the agricultural zone, and the uses for the agricultural zone may not be as objectionable as you would be for some of the uses in the heavy industrial zone. So that's kind of our thought process behind that, is the possibility of maybe looking at adding the special exception tag back on to just the agricultural zone as an option. I mean, it's really up to you as far as how you'd like to proceed with that. But that is something that we have seen in several of the regulations. Now, going on to the matter of setbacks, yes.
Quickly, either way, it has to go to BZA. Is that what you just said?
Yes. Yeah, we would not allow it by right, regardless of where we do it. It would either be, we leave it as is in the heavy industrial zone by special exception, or look at the possibility of adding it also in the agricultural zone, the AR zone, and then still be a special exception there, but it would not be by right either way. Something else that, I'm sorry, go ahead.
AR zone would limit the use, is really what you're saying.
Right, and I think that was kind of the concern we had. If you have a rock quarry that's zoned agricultural, or if you have somebody who wants to do a rock quarry in an agricultural zone, they get the property zoned agricultural. If for some reason the quarry is denied at the Board of Zoning Appeals, you still have an agricultural piece of property. The uses by right in that area are probably going to be more compatible with the surrounding residential area than you would see probably with the heavy industrial zone. That's kind of the thought process behind it. Now, as far as setbacks, I'd like to refer you to the maps in Appendix B. This report really was a full staff effort. We all had a good chunk of say into this regarding the text, or at least parts of the text, the chart. And Elizabeth did a lot of the chart work on that, as well as the research. We all did some of the research, but then our mapper, Mr. Eric McMillan, also did a really good job on these maps. On the first map, you'll see we've taken, this is an actual piece of property in Rutherford County. We took off the road names and everything because this is all hypothetical that we're seeing at this point. We didn't want somebody looking at their property and saying, oh goodness, they're putting a rock quarry on my property. That's not at all what we're doing. We're just trying to use this as an example. You can see what we're showing here on this hypothetical tract of 620 acres. This is what the county requirement is. Minimum setback for all resource production extraction from right-of-way, churches, residentially zoned property, 1,500 feet. So if you take a 1,500-foot setback throughout this tract, essentially what you have is a usable area of about 57.5 acres of quarryable area. This is where they could actually dig the rock. Now, to compare that with some of the other communities that we researched, on the second page you'll see Williamson County's regulations. They have minimum setbacks of 200 feet from all property lines for all structures and activities, as well as 1,000 feet from all property lines, again, for all structures and activities. And then quarrying and mining operation setbacks have to be from existing platted streets, roads, or rights-of-way 50 feet. And you'll see based on those setbacks, you can have about 208 acres of quarryable rock area based on those setbacks. The next test case, North Carolina, Shelby, North Carolina, it's a little bit, you see there's kind of rings there, and a lot of it depends on the surrounding zoning and those kind of things. But depending on the scenario that you're looking at and the surrounding zoning, we try to play with that a little bit. It's not as easy to see on the black and white maps. But, assuming everything around it was residential, if you're using those setbacks, that would be the innermost ring, I suppose, the largest area, the usable area. It would be about 199, about 200 acres. Looking at scenario 2, which would be the second one down, it would be about 308 acres, 309 acres. And then the last one around it, if you're surrounded by industrial land, it would be about 352 acres. So again, it depends on the surrounding zoning. Most of the zoning in Rutherford County you're going to find is going to be residential, so you're probably looking at the innermost ring. But that just kind of gives you an idea. Probably the most relaxed of the ones that we found, from the ones that we mapped anyway, was Charlotte, North Carolina. Again, it's kind of a tiered system depending on the zoning around the property. And you can see, depending on the surrounding zoning, you can vary anywhere from 393 acres of usable area all the way out to about 544 acres of that same 620-acre tract. So I hope that answers some of the questions that there were about the setbacks and some of the research that we did for that. At this point, we'll be happy to answer any questions. If you've got some questions about how I explain some of these things, I'll be more than happy to go back. Really, at this point, we're just kind of wanting to see what kind of direction you'd like us to take this into, because we have not made any recommendations at this point as far as recommended regulation changes. We kind of wanted to present this to you, give you a chance to digest it, and then have a discussion after that. So.
Chairman. First of all, I want to congratulate staff on this document because it was well done. I had a chance to go over it this afternoon, and it was very thorough, so I really do appreciate that. The one question I have on the first map
That'd be the Rutherford County map?
For the Rutherford
Okay.
County proposed. In the legend there, Doug, in fine print, it says, due to certain restrictions, it looks like distances from school is eliminated from this map.
Right.
So are you saying then that the wide hashed area is just a 1,500-foot buffer?
That's correct. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah, just for purposes of just showing you, obviously, if there was a school within 1 mile of this, then that would cut into this as
Right.
well. But we're just trying for those purposes, just to show you just a strict 1,500-foot setback. That's what you're looking at.
And then in simple math, then, if somebody had a 620-acre tract in this scenario, really, you could only use less than 10% of it.
On this tract, yes, sir. Now, a lot of it depends on the shape of the tract as
Right.
well and whatnot, so that can vary. But in this particular situation, yes, it would be under 10%. Yes, sir.
Okay. And a question that's unrelated to this document, but more about what you chatted about as opening up to an agricultural zone. I mean, I'm assuming, and Dale, this may be a kind of a question or comment that you can help me on. I said assume, of course that's always very dangerous, but I would imagine that there is a soils map of Rutherford County, because obviously you're not, just because you're zoned industrial does not mean that that's a suitable site for a quarry. You have to have tons and tons and tons and tons of rock. Are there locations in the county that are kind of earmarked that would be more suitable for a quarry site?
Well, we haven't earmarked any. What we've done is we've taken the soils map from what used to be the Soil Conservation Service.
Right.
And Eric McMillan has created a layer for that for our GIS. Now, that soil layer only goes down about 6 inches, so it has to be further. If you were going to put a soil quarry out there, I would assume you'd do more drilling and a lot more testing to determine the quantity of rock that's within a piece of property you were interested in.
There's really no guarantee until a potential quarry entity would go out and research property that's available for sale to see it would even support a quarry.
That's correct.
It may not be in an industrial zone. It may not even be in an agricultural zone. It's a crapshoot at this point. We don't know.
Right, of course, and that's why, based on even the zoning map that we have now, depending on how this goes, there would have to be a rezoning involved.
Right.
Because really, at this point, the only thing we're really looking at is, right now, the only thing we're looking at is heavy industrial. So if somebody identified an area after doing their due diligence and the geotech studies and everything that would have to be done on the front end to make sure that they could use the property, they would have to come back to us and ask for the rezoning of the property. And that's when you get a shot at looking at that. So.
Well, I remember the last, or a couple of evening meetings ago when we chatted about a mile buffer or something like that. I know Craig and I tried to do simple math on a hypothetical deal like this, but for some reason that night we couldn't remember how many quarts were in a gallon and acre, how many hectares? Yeah, right. But we just knew that it was ultimately be a really small footprint that would be actually usable. So I'm assuming then we can discuss if we want to alter the setback distances that are currently in the plan or proposed to be in the plan.
Yes, sir,
right?
you could. That's correct.
And I kind of made some notes this afternoon. I don't know. It looks like if you went to the North Carolina map a couple of pages back on that hypothetical, if you had 1,000-foot setbacks, it looks like it would approximately get you a let me see, make sure I'm reading the legend right. If you used 1,000-foot setbacks, you would have approximately 350 some acres. Is that right? Is that how I read that?
Well, are you looking at
option
Shelby?
One for option one? Yeah, Shelby, North Carolina,
okay.
Option one.
Is that 1,000-foot
setback? for
That's to any
blasting.
blasting,
I assumed
right.
worst case for everything.
Right.
If I just said I wanted 1,000 feet, no matter what, I don't care if they're crushing, if they're blasting or what, would that, in this scenario, would that not get you about 350 or a little bit over half of usable space?
It would depend on the surrounding zoning. If it was completely surrounded by residential property, there was no commercially zoned or industrially zoned property around it,
Right.
you would get about a 200. That'd be that inner one, the Shelby NC number 3.
Okay.
Yeah, 199 point.
Okay.
That would be that one.
So
the second tier, right? The second tier down is if there was a little bit of, if you were assuming surrounded by residential office or business, then you would have an extra. The setback to any building, extraction area road would be a little less, but the 1,000 feet would still be in there. So that would be a little bit more, 308 acres. And then the last one is if you had industrial surrounded by industrial property, then that would get you the 352.
Well, let me ask this question, because I know at that meeting, Josh in particular kind of gave us a warning that we have to be careful and not zone out a potential quarry based on buffers that may be or above. But also knowing that we have no idea where a potential quarry site may be in the county in the future. I mean, do you set some guidelines, but yet when a piece of property comes to us for review, you have to be able to, because if it's in a residential or an ag or wherever the case may be, then you'd have to play with the buffers a little bit, depending on who was the surrounding neighbor or neighbors. So, I mean, I don't know. I guess if we picked a buffer distance, it would be hard for us to hold that distance 4 or 5 years from now to a piece of property that we really don't know where in the county it could be. See what I'm saying? So I really don't know where we're going. I know that what we have, I think, is too restrictive, but do we just put a number out there to have it in the books, but then, kind of everything's negotiable kind of a deal for a quarry since it's a special exception? I don't know where to go with that.
Right, yeah, and, the setbacks, once they're set, I mean, even though it needs a special exception, you wouldn't want to vary those. They would be what they are. And this is kind of where we decided at this point that we didn't want to make a recommendation one way or the other, because we wanted to know what your thoughts were on the subject before we did anything else. I mean, based on the maps, you can see, now we didn't map every single one of them, of course, but, we tried to give you an overview of what some of the more restrictive ones look like versus some of the ones that were a little less restrictive. And maybe the answer is somewhere in between the two.
So the smart thing perhaps would then, for us to agree on a buffer if it was residential, a buffer if it was industrial, a buffer if it was state highway or interstate.
Yeah, I mean, you could do that. I mean, Williamson County, when you look at their regulations, I mean, they pretty much just have an across-the-board. Of course, they have minimum setback from all property lines for all structures, which is 200 feet. They have a minimum setback from all residential property lines and structures, which is 1,000 feet. And then, regardless, they have a quarry mining operation setback from platted streets rights away of 50 feet. So if it's not industrially zoned or if it's not residentially zoned, rather, you don't have the 1,000-foot buffer. You just go back down to the 200-foot buffer, which is why theirs kind of goes over. You see theirs kind of extends out just a little bit toward I guess that'd be the east. Assuming that property was zoned commercial or industrial. Again, the zoning we played with too. This isn't reality as far as the zoning. The lines are there, but that's pretty much it. So.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know how many quarry applications we've had, but in my 22 years of being up here, I don't think it's been any. I'm not of the point if it ain't broke, don't fix it, but I'm close to it. Very, very close to it. 1,500 feet is not just an arbitrary number just pulled out of the sky to make everybody feel good. There's a lot of things that go into that. When you're quarrying, 1,500 feet is not just for somebody playing a boombox in a residential area for sound. This is for blasting. out on regular sites, there's been rocks flying way past 1,500 feet. But that was a state requirement that was set up in the state many years ago for blasting in a quarrying type operation. And so it has a lot to do with depth, and surface rocks are going to fly more than your depth. Basically, in a quarrying operation, when you blast down deeper, it's basically just shifting a shelf of rock over and down, and then they quarry it out. So you're probably not going to get those rocks flying. But you have dust, and you have shock wave. You have shock through sound wave, and you have shock through the blast and everything else. So, if we want to get detailed, we can get detailed with the state and come up with, some of their, research that they've done that's been in place for years. But, that's why I came back with our requirements from what we had in our ordinance before to continue keeping those. To protect our residential areas that are already there. And then, of course, I know anything new, then we've got to look at it. The residents that are surrounding that property are going to look at it, with a fine-tooth comb as well. But this isn't just an arbitrary number out there that makes everybody feel good. I mean, it's in there for a reason. So, I'm very surprised, and I appreciate all y'all's research and hard work and putting it down into what Williamson County has gotten down, 1,000 feet and then 200. It's kind of shocking that they would be. I'd like to see those quarries, and if there's a new one under these new regulations, that would be interesting to see if in Williamson County, because I would think.
Not to cut you off, Mr. Sandlin. The draft, the regulation we're looking at for Williamson County, they're still draft form. They're kind of going through the same process we're going through. The research that was sent to us used that ordinance. I think they're I don't know if they're further along than we are necessarily. I mean, they're going through the public review process kind of like we are right now.
Well, that's not the requirements now for them.
No.
What are the requirements now for them?
I'd have to look that up.
Okay.
I don't know if that's changed much from their current, but I can find that out for you.
Well, I'll make a comment. I agree completely with taking it out of the heavy industrial zone. That was when you first talked about our zoning draft map. There were some people came unglued because the 4, I believe, or 5, and counting the county quarry, I don't know how many quarries we got, either 4 or 5, we're going to be zoned heavy industrial. I think one of them already is, but the others are in rural residential areas. And if that place were to stop being a quarry or to do something else, and they could do a lot of things that don't fit in the residential zone. So I agree with that completely. I think 1,500 feet's, I think we're just basically squeezing them out, and I don't think any of the existing quarries now would meet that by any stretch, because they were all grandfathered in from been here before that. A 400-acre tract of land wouldn't be allowed, in a square, wouldn't be allowed a quarry at all, no matter where it is. I wouldn't think 1,500 feet is a 3,000-foot buffer all the way around. Just simple math tells you that's a large tract of land. So. I don't want a quarry in my neighborhood, and a lot of people don't, but there are a lot of rural areas in this county that would probably work, and we have to have rock for concrete and construction and driveways and everything else, and I just think 1,500 feet is a little too much. I think if somebody took us to court, we'd have a problem, because I think we are basically shutting the door in their faces and saying it just can't be done. So I think we ought to be a little bit more flexible, but I don't think we ought to have a 200-foot setback by any means, but 1,500 feet is 3,000 feet all the way around, on both ways, and that's just a lot of acreage right there.
Mr. Chairman, when I asked for this to study, and it's a good deal, that I was talking about if we made it 500 feet, and if you could get the other 1,000 feet that Steve was talking about, the 1,500 feet off of an adjacent landowner, that they would sign an easement to take care of. We'd have 1,500 feet, but say it's a rough farm. This map you have right here, I suppose these are in the dark or just regular farms. Is that correct?
I think those are actually commercial or industrial properties.
Okay.
Yeah, they're not agricultural. They're more commercial.
Say the whole
non-residential.
south and west side of a piece of property was just a rough farm. If that landowner would sign off using his for an additional 1,000 feet of buffer, some way to work this out. I too think 1,500 feet is pretty large, but I agree with Steve. Hadn't seen one, probably won't see one. And like Mike says, just because it's zoned commercial, don't mean there's going to be a rock quarry there. Don't mean it's a possibility. You're right. So it's a lot of things here. But then Josh tells us, we don't want to be too demanding. So it's a big challenge right here to come up with. And we just can't throw a dart on the wall and come up with it.
Yeah, and if I can point you, the commission, to the chart in Appendix A, the first, I guess that's the first page, under Knox County, Tennessee, and we'd be looking under the setbacks. Starts out in industrial zones, and this kind of speaks a little bit to what you're talking about, Mr. Lynch. Not exactly, but similar. In industrial zone, excavation areas shall be at least 100 feet from any residential, agricultural, or commercial zone, and at least 200 feet from any dwelling or platted subdivision. Then that second sentence says overburden, spoil bank, etc., basically storage areas, must be at least 100 feet from any such property lines unless written consent is provided by adjacent property owners. Something like that does exist that we've seen, at least in Knox County, from the regulations that we were reviewing. That's not necessarily dealing with the blasting and all of that, the actual quarry area. That's really more dealing with the overburdens, the spoils area, that kind of thing. The biggest concern I guess I have with something like that is, quarries are generally longer-term uses. If you have property owner A who signs something that says, yeah, I don't have any problem with the quarry locating, being part of that setback area or whatever, 10 years from now he sells the property owner B comes back in, well, I don't like that. I don't want to do that anymore. Now, granted, it was already signed when he bought it. He should have realized that. I understand that. But I can just see that becoming problematic over time. Not that it's not worth exploring, but I think that's something that we need to consider as we're looking through this. That's just something I think that we really need to be vigilant upon. And then, what do you sign? Does it have to be something in the deed? Does it have to be just a piece of paper you can sign, we stick in the file? It doesn't really go into that here as far as that goes.
It would almost have to be a permanent easement or at least an easement. As long as the quarry was in operation to be effective, looks like to me.
Right. I mean, I would agree with what you're saying. I think it would have to be more than just a little written statement saying, yeah, I'm okay with this. I think there need to be something higher than that. Right. But that's just, that's just a concern that we had. And again, that's the closest thing that we found. Now, granted, we've looked at 10 around this area, and plus we have looked at others, we didn't put in part of this, but when we were originally looking at this a month or so ago, we looked at like Smyrna's regulations and a few others around here. Nothing like that you're referring to that's at least in this area. So, but there's a lot of areas obviously that we haven't looked at. So.
Doug, I want to chase that rabbit for just another minute. I'm thinking what Craig is thinking. I'm kind of comparing it to when somebody comes in and they want to lease land for like a cell tower. They didn't sell the land and the zoning on the land didn't change. They're just using it for their purpose. And I'm just wondering, as a body, how would we react if a quarry application came in? Are we going to say your buffer must exist only within the boundaries of the property you own? Or if they present to us a plan that includes leased property, permanent easement, something along those lines, whether it be temporary or permanent, which may, fold into the answer here, I don't know. How would we react to that? Because they would technically have their buffer, but it might not be contained within the property that they own.
I don't necessarily have an answer to that, but obviously the maps that we have in this scenario are all self-contained at that point. currently, I don't think unless something like that exists, I don't think if you don't have 1,500 foot to your property line, you just can't do it. I mean, you don't meet you just don't meet the regulations. You know, it would have to be remain on site at currently, unless we put something like that in there. Yes, sir, that's correct.
That's the current 1,500 feet.
Right. And if it's actually, any new quarry would have to be in the I-3 zone. If that's the case, then if you're adjacent to commercial or industrial, you have to be set back 300 feet. It's a little, for ours, it's a little different, but that's only if it's in the I-3 zone, which there's nothing on the ground right now that I'm aware of in Rutherford County. So.
All the quarries in the county meet that now, or?
I mean, without having a map right in front of me.
Regulates it, really, when you get down to it. Who goes out? I mean, do you have to have a complaint to go out, sort of like?
That's typically how our codes enforcement works, yes, sir. Right, well, zoning enforcement, which is through our codes department, yes, sir. I guess we're just looking for guidance at this point, and just to backtrack just a little bit, I may have been remiss by leaving one of my planners' names out, Ms. Glauner. She had a big part in writing the text. I think I mentioned everybody else by name except her. She's watching. Hopefully she doesn't think I was trying to snub her. I wasn't. but I guess at this point we're just looking for, just the discussion that we're getting right now, which is very helpful, and just kind of a direction. Do you want us to go? We've looked into what you've asked us to look in for. If you want some more, we can obviously do that. Or just give us a direction how you would like us to move forward. If you want us to propose maybe some different regulations for Rutherford County and how that would look based on our existing regulations, maybe varying those a little bit, we can certainly do that. It's really, we're just looking for guidance at this point.
Brief comment. I find it a little unusual that we would be more restrictive on anything than Williamson County. We generally aren't.
Well, this is what Williamson County's got on the table, just like what we've got working on the table right now. This isn't what they're going by or approved. So that's what yeah.
That 150 feet from the right-of-way, really not that hard to get, because a lot of them have the big berm overburden already around the place, and those shield and hide rock quarries, and they use the stuff that they can't use to make a berm with. So 150 feet is not, that's.
And we didn't talk so much about screening. That really wasn't. I don't think that was really the direction you were really wanting to look in, but we did kind of research that as well. Essentially, it was all over the board as to what the different areas did. But under most circumstances, depending on the zoning and the type of use and everything, you're looking at a type 3 buffer for a use like this under our current regulations, which would be our thickest buffer that we have, the type 3 buffer. So there would be, you know, a certain amount of trees, certain width of the landscape area they'd have to do, the possibility of fencing and those kind of things. So, you know, again, not something that we really talked much about, but you kind of brought it up there when you were talking about the berms and everything.
Would the berm be permissible? I mean, okay, this berm that I'm thinking is the overburden, the big stuff, the things they couldn't use, some dirt, some rock. It will have trees in about 8 years.
Yeah, well, we would probably be looking more on the front end of maybe not the overburden or the spoil areas. We'd probably be looking for just a regular earth mound planted immediately with trees around it. Not so much just waiting for them to go over time as they do their thing and make the berm bigger. You know, if they want to do it to supplement things, maybe that might work. But I think we'd be looking more on the front end for an actual constructed earthen berm as part of the buffer area.
Do we really need a 1 mile buffer for school? And where did that come from?
It's been in our regulations since I've been here. I think the thought was just trying to keep it away from those type of uses, really away from the schools. So, but I don't know if there's any special significance to a 1 mile. I think that was just what they came up with at the time.
There are probably, the county's got 40 schools and that's something in that range. Then the city, and then private schools, there are probably 60 schools in the county. If you do a 1 mile radius smaller, that takes a whole lot of the county out.
Well, you got a $50 million school sitting there and you got a rock quarry blasting. Do you want $50 million worth of concrete and kids in jeopardy? I don't think so. You're missing with something here.
Why not say 10 miles then?
You can say whatever you want to, but I said,
what's the magic with 1 mile, though? I mean,
yeah. I don't want us to get into a point here where we're just pulling out a number out of the hat. So if you want to look up the state regulations and see what that is, you want to, think about this right here. I'm pretty much settled on that 1,500 feet myself, but if we want to do something else, I don't really want to, throw something out here and okay, let's do this and we're done tonight, Yeah,
and we can look at, I'm not familiar with any state regulations that require a minimum distance. I mean, they may very well be out there. I know there are regulations as far as having to produce reclamation plans and things like that, which we've actually incorporated into our new document by referring to the state code. But we can certainly see what is out there for setback purposes and bring that back at our next meeting for just some further discussion. So we'll be happy to do that. Kind of making an addendum to our report, if you will.
We've had some discussion, and Mike made a couple of points about liking this and liking that, and I saw some heads nodding. Not all, but I saw some heads nodding. Would it be possible to put some of those scenarios to our regulations to see what they look like?
Yes, sir. I'm happy to do it.
Bring that back. Would that be reasonable, something for us to at least look at?
Yes, sir. And at the next meeting, it'd be in our mezzanine, and it might be possible to have some larger maps. There'd probably be an easier way to put some of the larger maps out for better review. At this point, we could have done it, but we were also trying to be conscious of paper and everything at the same time. Plus, these desks really aren't the most suitable for larger prints. So, but we could certainly look to do that.
Also, some input that relates to.
Yes, sir. We'd be happy to do that.
Can I just make one more comment based on some of the things I'm reading in Appendix A? You're right. I don't know if there even is a state minimum setback. If it was 1,500 feet, then all 5 quarries that are listed here are out of compliance. So I'm not sure where that number really comes from. But look at Knox County's non-industrial zone, and I'm not saying that 300 feet is a good number, but they're saying that you only have to have 300 feet between schools, churches, hospitals, sanitariums, residential zones. I think 300 is way too small, but it's a long way from a mile for schools. So somewhere in Table A, there's got to be a happy answer for us, or a combination of.
That's correct. The Williamson County regulations that were referred to us were the ones that are still in their draft form. That's correct. And we'll look at their current ones as well to see how different they are from what they're proposing for the next meeting. Mm-hmm.
That good enough for everybody? So we will look at that at our next meeting.
Yes, and that.
Speaking
yes.
of our next meeting.
Yeah, that next meeting, as you know, our meetings are typically the second and fourth Monday. Of course, the fourth Monday this month falls on Memorial Day. And as much as I like you all, I will not be here on that day because we will have the day off. So we were going to be moving that meeting to the 29th, which is the day right after that, the Tuesday. We'll still do it at 9 a.m., and we'll be in our mezzanine meeting room like we normally are. But I just wanted to make that announcement to everyone who may be watching and also to the commissioners that our next meeting will be Tuesday the 29th and not Monday the 28th. Is
that okay with everybody? Move it to Tuesday, the
29th. Yes, sir. 29th. Still be at 9 a.m. Still be in our mezzanine meeting room. Everything else is the same. We're just shifting the day for the holiday.
Is that okay? Okay. So our next meeting will be on Tuesday, 9 a.m. in the Mez at the Planning Commission office.
As far as the zoning is concerned, I know we kind of left the last work session where the commissioners were going to kind of look a little more into the things, and if they had other comments, they could bring them to us. At this point, really, we've only heard one or two things. I didn't know if this would be a good time to, if you have anything just specific besides what we've already talked about that you had some concerns on, we could look into for the next meeting. If not, if you don't have anything right now, obviously feel free to give us a call at our office. We'll be more than happy to look into whatever it is you want us to look into.
Everybody done?
Okay.
Anything else?
I think Mr. Reed had some things, but I see he was detained tonight.
I'm sorry?
Mr. Reed
Yes,
had some things, I think, that he will be bringing up, I think. On the PUD, the 20%, everybody's still okay with that?
Well, it's interesting. I'm kind of glad you brought that up, actually. I wasn't sure if we were going to get into this or not tonight, but there was a article in the Daily News Journal yesterday. I believe they were talking to Mr. Steve Jansen with the Home Builders Association, and I thought it was a very good article. They seemed pretty pleased with the compromise that we made regarding the units per acre. In the rural areas, 1 unit acre, the compromise we came up with. There was still some concern about the planned unit development requirement for open space. As you do recall, our current requirement, we're just proposing to move that over to the new document of our current regulations, which requires a 20% open space, with half of that being what's called usable open space, more improved type open space. The article made mention that there's still a lot of concern about that. Now, I know that's something we've talked about, and I've actually have the handout we had here that we presented to the Planning Commission a couple months ago, I guess. I'm not sure exactly what meeting it was now. We basically set aside, we proposed 4 different options. You could keep the 20% requirement, just eliminate the requirement for usable open space, allowing any combination of the two. So you didn't have to, if you had like a river or stream going through the property, you could just count that as the entire 20%, not necessarily have to add on top of that to make it improved open space. A second option would be to reduce the requirement from 20% to 10%, which basically just halves everything. You would have 10% open space with 5% of it having to, or half of that, which is 5%, having to be usable open space. The third option would be to just eliminate any minimum open space requirements and to evaluate each plan development on its own merits. I don't like that approach as well. I know that some of the municipalities around here, Murfreesboro most notably, does use that. I believe the article made mention of that. The biggest issue that I have with it, it's not that I think there's anything wrong with it necessarily. I think what ends up happening with that is it becomes a little more subjective at that point. One development, you're making him do 3 to 4%. The next one comes in, oh, I think you need more open space here. I think you need more there. He has like maybe 7, 8%. There's no, I realize all property is different, and what may work on this property may not work over here, but you can see how that can become more subjective in enforcement. You know, if one person's being required to look at maybe 3 to 4%, the other person, well, we think you need more than that. You know, I think if you have a level playing field, you eliminate that potential issue. The fourth option, something that we talked about just briefly, was develop some sort of a sliding scale. We did quite a bit of research on different plan development ordinances and could not find one that did any kind of a sliding scale like that. We felt that might be a little cumbersome as far as trying to enforce it, and just felt that that was not a good option. So those were the options that we proposed. Of course, you could just leave it the way it is after discussion again, but you know, we're willing to listen to what anybody has to say, of course. Now, we, like I said, kind of like the rock quarries, you know, we have gone down this road already, but you know, we can certainly open it back up to some more discussion on that. But that was the concerns that were related by the home builders in the Daily News Journal's article.
Well, Doug, this is only in PUDs.
That's correct. Yes, sir.
So it's more dense population area that we're talking about, and we're talking about an optional there. This is not a voluntary. Yeah, it's voluntary. That's
Right.
what I was looking for. Voluntary 20%. This isn't in stone 20%.
Right. No, and the reason we came up, again, but when we first did the regulation changes, now it's been a few years since we've made those changes, but we looked at several different ordinances around Tennessee and even outside of Tennessee, and quite frankly, it ran the gamut as far as regulations for open space. You had some that, you know, were like Murfreesboro City, didn't require any, it's required open space, but not any kind of a minimum percentage. But there were some that we saw that were as high as 30%. You know, so we certainly didn't go as high as we had seen in the research we did. The biggest reason that we came up with some sort of an open space requirement was in plan developments. Typically, what you see in a plan development are generally the types of developments that you couldn't see by right in another zone. The lots may be smaller, the setbacks may be different. You may have a mixture of uses, those kind of. I mean, it could be a variety of things. No height regulations. There's several different things it could be. And this was kind of the trade-off to that. Say, okay, you want more than what you normally would be allowed to have, that's fine. We want you to provide open space as part of the development. That's why we like some sort of a requirement. If the Plan Commission feels more comfortable with a 10% as opposed to a 20%, you know, as staff, I don't think we'll have any real heartburn with that, but that is a concern that was brought up. And that's the reason why we like some sort of a required open space.
Sure, we've talked about this, but can you redefine usable open space in that scenario?
I'll open my ordinance here. Okay, and these are the definitions that are within our current zoning document, our current regulations. Again, these were just pretty much copied and pasted with some modification into the new ordinance. Open space is any land or area within the boundaries of development, the preservation of which in its present use would conserve, enhance natural scenic resources, protect streams, water supply, conservation of soils, wetlands, enhance recreational opportunities. Usable open space are those areas within the boundaries of development that are designed, set aside, maintained for either active or passive recreation or both. They're available and accessible for use and enjoyed by all the residents of the development. Permitted uses in these zones for open space, you're looking at green belts that serve as buffers between land uses, using existing vegetation or aesthetic amenities such as trees, boulevard trees, agricultural or pasture uses, or preservation of important natural features. Usable open space would be like pedestrian, bike, or multi-purpose trails, passive recreation like a pocket park, or even active recreation areas such as ball fields, playgrounds, those kind of things. Yes.
I have a question. In a step system, if you'll remember several months ago and several meetings ago, one of the local engineering firms here did a scenario where he listed about 7 or 8 subdivisions that they had done, and he gave number of lots, and then based on the soils, he had a breakdown percentage of what the step system took away from that usable land.
Yes, sir.
And it's anywhere from 15 to 30%, depending on your soils. In a step area, okay, set aside for step, help me here because I really don't understand. Can any of that be used as like a passive type?
No, currently we don't allow that. Now, step areas are deeded to consolidated utility districts, and they're fenced off.
Okay.
So they don't allow any use on them, really, I'm sure for liability purposes and things, but which is the big reason why we don't allow them in either our current regulations or what we're proposing in our new ordinance for recreation areas now, or open space. Now, what we have done, because of those concerns, is we basically said, okay, if you have 100 acres of land, and we'll just to make it a clean number, your 20 acres of your area, your property has to be used for a step system. You calculate your open space on the 80 acres. You don't calculate it on the whole 100, because I mean, I understand where the developers are coming from on that. So, right, yeah, we don't count that part against them as far as the open space requirement. So, but we don't allow it to be counted as passive open space, because, I mean, or just regular open space, because there's really nothing you can do with it.
So in a step system field, I mean, every place I've lived has been on water or on sewer, so I don't really know what one would look like in a subdivision. Is it
pleasing
to the eye? Is it shortcut manicured grass? Is it?
You know, I think
look like swampland. What does it look like?
Wood was here. I think she's already left, but yeah, I think they keep it. I mean, and Mr. Lynch, you might be able to help with that, but I think they do keep it mowed.
Some of them are mowed, some of them are cut for hay about 3 to 4 times a year. So I think it depends on where they are and how they want to do them. They're
may
all
see a
fenced.
building or two on it just for, you know, the mechanical areas on the property. Sometimes you'll see them there.
So aesthetically, it's not a bad piece of raw land or manicured land.
The biggest complaint I've had about them is they put up. I've had people say these would look really good if they had a little nicer looking fence around them. And other than that, that's the only comment I've had about them.
All right. Well, I've always fought the 20% rule. I think 10 is more realistic. And if I had to make a motion, I'd say 10. But ready for that.
I have a comment on this. I'm reading in page 9-4 in our draft document here. And it says, in all mixed-use PUDs that include residential uses, a minimum of 10% of the gross project area shall be set aside as open space, with at least 50% of this land being usable open space. All PUDs that are completely non-residential are exempt from this requirement. So we're saying half of 10% has to be usable, which means I'm on 9-4.
Okay.
Yeah, look at it with me, Doug. And I just want to make sure that we're all reading it right.
Yeah, I'm thinking what you're reading there, that might be one of the older. What's the date of your draft that you've got?
November 14th.
What's that?
November 14th.
Yeah, we've changed that since.
So read it again, because what I thought I heard you say when you read it initially was 20%, but half of the 20% has to be usable open land, which is really already just 10%. So if we take it down to 10%, now we're saying only 5% has to be usable. So at one point, is it even worth doing? So I feel like we're already at 10%.
Yeah, I don't have the newest version in front of me, but I do know that sentence that you're talking about has actually been struck from the language because we're fearful that someone would try to include a commercial parcel just to get the lower percentage. So we reworded it to where commercial parcels, if there are any in a PUD, would be exempt from the open space requirement just as the step system areas are. And so that sentence has been struck entirely. It's just 20%.
But on the paragraph that Doug read as part of the opening of this conversation, read that paragraph again. Because I thought I heard you say in that paragraph that it was 20%, but half of that 20%.
Right.
That's correct.
Yeah, then that is still current. Yeah, it's a minimum 20% of the gross project area. Of course, what we're proposing is except the step areas would be set aside as open space, and then half of that would have to be usable open space. So basically, you've got 20% completely open, but 10% of the entire area has to be usable, is how it breaks down, really.
So if we take it down to 10% space, then I think we need to keep the 10% has to be usable, not half of 10% has to be usable. Because that's really all we have now anyway.
Well, if you made it down to 10%, then basically what you'd be saying is all 10% has to be usable open space based on that. So what you're saying is just say an all PUD's requirement is 10% usable open space.
Yeah, because, I mean, what's the other 10% going to be anyway?
Well, and that's a good thought. Let me ask you a part B to that. Do you count, if it's a residential type PUD or mixed use but heavy on the residential, if you have amenities such as a pool, a tennis court, volleyball,
that's part of it. That counts as usable open space.
All that square footage of whatever those amenities would be, including a clubhouse perhaps,
yes, I would think
would
so.
count towards their requirement of the 20
yes.
or 10 or?
Yes, sir, it would.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. So you do count the amenities into the
yes.
in the equation?
Yes, sir, we do.
Okay. And you mentioned a while ago the river. If a river ran through it, would it be considered?
You could count that, yes, sir. Mm-hmm.
As the 10% usable? I mean,
if there's walking trails with it, you could. I mean, just in and of itself.
To me, 10% the river would be a great idea because that's me, but I don't think it would be Rhonda.
Area adjacent to the river would be in the floodplain or the floodway. Would that count? Because that's not developable land.
It could count, yes, sir. And like the way we currently have it, I mean, it's pretty wide open as far as what you could count. The reason we've got basically, the way it's worded, you have a minimum of 20% of the gross project area shall be set aside as open space, and at least 50% of that land, of the 20%, has to be usable. I mean, we left it open like that just so you could use a variety of things. You know, we didn't want the situation where someone just counted, like you said, a river runs through it, they just count the river as the entire open space and they don't do anything else. But that's why we had the usable open space as well. If someone wanted to do, pools, those kind of things, but they could do that regardless. But that was why we put in the usable open space requirement, not just leaving it as just 20% open space, have at it. We just thought it'd be more appropriate to have a usable open space component with that.
I got one more clarification. And Rhonda, thank you for asking this question because it reminded me of something else. And correct me if I'm wrong. I'm thinking as it currently reads, if it says in all residential PUDs, it's 20%. If it is PUDs that include residential, which means it could be commercial, then it's only 10%.
We struck that out. Basically,
you just struck out.
Right. You just don't count the commercial areas in the calculation. You just basically what you do is you're using the residential portion as what's that? Yes. Doesn't count. Right. That'd be the best way.
All right.
And then any completely non-residential ones are just exempt from the open space requirement.
So the entire piece of property, less the area needed for a step system, at that point, I would then make a motion that we change the wording to 10% requirement. And if you want to say all of that 10% needs to be usable, I'm okay with that.
My personal thought on it, I'd like someone to be able to use an unimproved feature as part of the open space.
So raw.
Well, no, I mean, if you want to cut it down to 10%, that's fine, because then half of the 10% would still have to be usable open space. That would still allow them the ability to count natural features, undisturbed natural features, but then still requirement for, parks, walking trails, pools, whatever. That would still
kick that
All
requirement.
right, so as long as the other 5% is pasture land or a nice grove of trees that are existing or potential stream and the stream buffer that would be required, that's non-usable, right? But it's still
would count.
It's still
Yes, sir.
beautiful. It's still aesthetically pleasing when you're on your patio looking out over the
Yeah,
pasture land.
Yeah, if that's I would be more comfortable with that myself.
Well, then I can always be shot down, but then I will, if you need a motion, I would suggest then reducing the step system or taking the step.
Which we're already doing.
Already doing.
Yeah.
And then allowing for a 10% requirement with 5% being usable.
Basically, all we'll do, based on what
All
you're
you're doing
saying,
is changing
yeah,
the 20
just changing
to
the
10.
20 to 10 is basically what you're doing, right? Everything else would fall into place the way it should.
Well, if you needed a motion, I just made one.
Mike, why don't we let staff put that suggestion together, and then we can move on it next time, take a look at it, and then we can.
That's fine. We can do that.
So if that's okay with you, let's let them put it in writing and see what it looks like. They can kind of send that out along with some of the other proposals that we've got on the rock quarries to us in advance so we can take a look at that. Yep. Is that okay?
That's fine. Yeah, that's fine. We can certainly do that.
Run some ratios there I know we've looked at one PUD down off Almaville Road that never came to fruition, I think, maybe two down there. Can you run some ratios of how many lots they actually gained by going to the PUD? And then we'll figure out whether the 20% is excessive or the 10% is not enough,
We can certainly, we actually already have a chart that Ms. Emsley had worked on planned developments that were approved in the county about how much open space was provided, and we can look at the lots. It might be hard to say how much it'd be a hypothetical just because it's all, there's no limit as far as, I know that was a concern the home builders had that I discussed with them, was they felt they wanted it more explicit that you could offset any reduction in land area by increasing the amount of units you could have per acre, which was always the intent of the planned development. It was never a density neutral type situation, but we made that as part of the purpose statement that yes, you can increase the density beyond what you would normally be allowed, provided you have the services, obviously, to handle it. So, but yeah, we can certainly try to do that.
Mike?
Chairman, you had mentioned at the last meeting, I thought a goal to be able in June, I believe, at the June meeting, to if we were ready to bring a motion to the table in June for the zoning ordinance. Is that still your feeling?
No.
Okay.
Our last 6 p.m. meeting, it was a goal. Let's see if we can get this done, but we've still got some more work to do. So with the county commission being focused on budget and financing, it would not be a real smart thing for us to do right now. Let's kind of get this thing to where we want it, continue the work sessions as long as we need until we've worked ourselves out. And then my suggestion would be when the new year begins in August, then we begin to work on the county commission and educate the commission. So if we can get it done this fall, we'll still be okay. But we shouldn't be in any hurry to do it. But June is not realistic now.
Well, besides the quarry and the PUD discussion that we just had, is there any other hanging issues that would keep us from bringing a motion to the full commission? All right. So really, those are the last few things we just need to iron out. Does everybody kind of agree with that?
I know Pettis mentioned the other day that he had
Okay. Well, sure, certainly.
Well, yeah, Pettis had mentioned, we've talked, Mr. Reed and I, a couple different times about, and I think he brought this up at the last meeting as well, about the possibility if somebody has agriculturally zoned land and wants to rezone it, about the possibility of not requiring any fees for that, or maybe if somebody wants to downzone property from a residential category to, say, a agricultural zone, we don't charge them for that. I don't think that's something that necessarily needs to be in the zoning ordinance. That's something we can handle just through our normal fee schedule. I don't really foresee any real problem with that, just ironing it out and figuring out how we want to handle that. Down zonings, we do see them occasionally, like we did today, but that's something I think we could handle outside of the zoning ordinance. Typically, you don't see fee structures within the document itself. Like that's kind of a separate item. But that's something that he related to me as a possibility, and I'm more than happy to come up with some recommendations for that. So,
Mike, possibly August, September, October, we need some time, staff needs some time, and we need some time to communicate effectively with the full county commission and not just bring it to them without them being able to really realize what
they're voting on.
So when they get telephone calls, they'll kind of know what more about it. So I think that educational process, we should take at least a month or so, at least some time to educate the county commission on what that final draft or the past.
Yeah, Jeff, y'all won't meet y'all don't meet in August or what?
In July, they don't meet.
Don't meet in July. You pass the budget at the end of June. Don't meet in June.
Twice in June and not in July.
Chairman Phillips, when you say educate the county commission, are you saying are we going to have to present something to kind of get them educated? What kind of protocol are we going to?
That would be my vision. There's no way to do it without having a meeting with that commission, giving them the proposal, going through the high points as to what makes it different than what we have right now, and letting those guys study that thing for a month or so before they vote on it. I don't think we want to bring it to them and say, here it is, yes or no.
I agree. Thank you. I just wanted to clear up how we would,
So if we could do that sometime in August or September, and they would be prepared to vote on it, and would be a lot more informed and educated, so they could vote on it whenever they wanted to, September, October, November,
maybe somewhere. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I didn't mean to cut you off. And maybe a possibility, and I'm just throwing this out there, we didn't want to discuss this, of course, with Mayor Burgess and some of the members of the county commission as well, but maybe the possibility of a joint work session with the planning commission and county commission all together at the same time. We have our consultant, Mr. Terry, present to kind of go through the high points, as well as staff, to kind of work through everything. Maybe that's a question answer time for both parties at that point, before a public hearing, possibly. Maybe that. I kind of like that idea, as far as that way at the public hearing wouldn't be the first time that they've heard a presentation at that point. So as a possibility, just throw it out there for consideration. Well, my staff and our consultant, we'd make sure he could be on board to help with that as well. But, when we first started going through these work sessions, we kind of had a PowerPoint where we kind of went through the high points of the document and, how we were doing the zoning classifications, how we're handling the uses, some of the major changes. I kind of envisioned something like that, and maybe going a little more in depth into how we came up with the zoning map we came up with, and the compromises we've made there, and some of the other things that we've discussed here. I'm sure, whenever we come up with a definitive answer on the rock quarry issues and the plan developments, kind of talk about those issues that, gave us a little more, issues that needed a little more study than maybe some of the others did, those kind of things. Again, that's just kind of me talking, that nothing concrete about that, just as a
Well, I'm just curious, on how we're going to present it to them. That's why I brought that up.
Right. That's just a thought at this point. Yeah.
It would need to be a work session, just like some of the work sessions that we've gone through. Maybe not just like that, but it would need to be a work session. Allow them. I would envision us taking a 30 minutes at a county commission meeting and handing them the document and kind of hitting the highlights at that document, and then scheduling a work session after they've had a chance to review it and receive enough information that they could ask questions or voice some concerns themselves.
So I got one more question. I'm just really concerned about this because I want to make sure once we present it, it's really going to go over well because, again, we have spent a lot of time and worked very hard on it.
Exactly right.
How many sessions will we have to do to present it? Will it just be one? Because I know we've been doing this a while.
Once again, Doug could probably answer this better than me, but I would envision handing them the document, maybe the document that we've passed, okay? This is the document, and then with some highlighted areas of things that have been items that we've discussed and rediscussed and rediscussed and had all these work sessions on, and what the zones really mean, those type of things. Allow them the opportunity to look at that document, and then if the county commission wanted to have a work session to field their questions. And once again, that would be up to the commission and to Mayor Burgess to do that. But I would see it as being a pretty informative and educational work session if the county commission chose to do that. And once again, the reason for that, I think, you see the school board, as an example, has work sessions all the time. And they get a lot done there, and we've got a lot done just in this work session tonight. So if the county commission would be open to that, I think we could receive some good information from them and maybe answer questions that they may have, or concerns that they may have, or try to anyway.
And I think if members of the Planning Commission were present at the work session, then obviously, I mean, you guys have been the ones that have really worked through all this. So, I mean, I would imagine they may have some of the same questions that some of y'all may have had. And at that point, even some of you could get up and say, well, yeah, this is why we've discussed these things. This is, just as a, yeah. I think it'd be a good idea if you were. Yes, ma'am. But stay tuned. We'll kind of flesh that out as we go forward. Nothing further.
It's been a good meeting. I enjoyed the conversation and the input and the ideas. Anything else? We're adjourned.